The Bush School. How one act changed the tranquillity of the One Teacher School to vulnerability. Farraday. Prepared and presented by Hank Nelson.
Travellers speeding past on the Calder Highway, just south of Bendigo, barely glimpsed the Farraday School number 797. It was 103 years old in 1972. There was an enrolment of 10, but on the 6th of October, there were only 6 girls at school. They came from 3 local farming families. All had had at least one grandparent taught in the same granite classroom. Their teacher, Mary Gibbs, was just 20. It was her first year as a teacher. The 2 men who had chosen to force trauma on Farraday were Robert Boland and Ted Eastwood. Both had committed minor crimes before, but this was a crime to court massive response, failure and disaster.
Well, we'd just come in after lunch. The children had their lunch break. We'd come in after lunch and we'd settle down. I think it was probably a little bit chilly, so I thought they could run around a little bit and warm up, and they were inside and we were playing musical chairs when these 2 gentlemen burst their way through the door. They arrived with the statement that school's over for the day. And at this stage, at that stage you sort of look up and think, ho, 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 you know what's this all about? One fellow had on a balaclava, the other fellow had on a floppy hat and dark glasses, so they were both fairly heavily disguised. One was carrying a sawn-off gun and a bag. Well, they start waving the gun around for a start and so telling us that we're going with them. I asked them, why are we going with you? They just said we're worth $1 million to them. I said, that's ridiculous, how can that be? Well, words to that effect anyway, this is not verbatim. And I said, well, what about if we refuse to go with you? We're not going with you, what will happen then? And at this stage, the fellow had the gun. I also opened up I think he had the bag as well, I'm not sure which one had the bag anyway. I opened up the bag, and inside the bag were chains and sticking plaster, and they said, well, if you don't come with us peacefully, we're going to use these on you. And I thought, well, you can't sort of tie up 6 little girls like that. So I said, well, where are we going? And they said, well, it's none of your business, just get out.
Boland and Eastwood ordered Mary Gibbs and the girls into the back of a van.
The van was an old tip-top red van, old red and white van. It was totally enclosed. It was steel all the way around, totally enclosed, no windows. There was the wheel humps to sit on, and there was a bit of a hump thing at the front to sit on, that was it. There were little potholes that you could peep through, and we could see that, the children would sort of peep through them occasionally and say, oh, we're getting kinder now, and this type of thing. And that was about it. But they didn't, Eastwood didn't really like them looking through the holes all that much, so they were quite frightened. You could tell just, they were stunned, I think, and we were all stunned, really. So, but there was no histrionics, there were no tears, there was sort of no panic at all. So it was very calm, even though it was quite an horrific situation. When the van stopped, we were in forest, quite thick, spindly type forest. It was getting quite cold then too. It was the trees were pretty dense where we were right up at the back of a bush track there somewhere, and it was virtually in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing, no sign of life anywhere, and it was pretty eerie and scary. They opened the door, and Eastwood he got out and was talking to Boland, and they shut the door, and then Eastwood took off in the car. So we were left alone with Boland. Boland was very calm. He also had the even though they were sort of reassuring that we were going to come to no harm, they still maintained a threatening nature about them. They still indicated we have the gun. The gun is there. At one stage, after we'd been there a little while and the children wanted to go to the loo, well, he let them go, one or two at a time, but he, made sure that they didn't run off. And when I wanted to go off, he really, he called out, don't go too far, and this type of thing. So there was that threatening, I've got the children, so that threat was hanging over us all the time. I asked him if we could go for a bit of a walk around the area. So we went for a walk there, and being a teacher and having children, we take the opportunity, and we had a little nature study lesson in the middle of all of this, and we were looking at bits of lichen or whatever else we could find that was on the ground, and creepy crawlies. And so we did that for about an hour. When I was talking with Boland, he just very calmly said, I've got this, and it was lifted up a knife, and it was a flick knife, and flicked the blade out. So that threat was there, continually there, even though this, presence of calmness was there, this threat of violence was there the whole time.
The kidnappers had disrupted the teacher and pupils of Farraday School as they played musical chairs, the first activity after lunch on a Friday afternoon. 2 hours later, the mothers waited outside an empty school to collect their daughters. Thelma Conn had 2 of her children there that day.
We were standing, the 3 parents outside the school, which we always said was our mother's club. We never had a mother's club. Has it too loud here now? And then time was ticking by, and Sylvia Ulry looked at her watch, and she said, I'm going to shake Mary up. She said, she's running late today. She walked into the school, up the steps, and I could still see her. She come out, she said, there's no one there. We both went in, Mrs. House and I was here, and we looked around. Where can she be? Her car was there. As I said, we'd used 3 different roads to get there, and the 4th road was the Golden Point Road with the reservoir on it. I said, she's gone on a nature walk. We'll go and look for her. Somebody else went up to Iris House, went home, I think, and someone went back to the water bars, which was the nearest house, to ring her home. Sylvie did. And I went down Golden Point and looked. No, Mary's not anywhere around. I come home here, we were shearing. I got Jock out of the shearing shed, and he went down to the school, and by this time we had the water bailiff and Mr. House. And they rang the police. They went to use the phone, and it was disconnected, so that's why they used the house and the water bailiff's house and phoned the police. And it was the police that found the note in the school room. I didn't go back to the school. I had Adele. She was 18 months. I brought her home. And then the search was on, sort of thing, and my sister and brother-in-law come here, and he had the fire truck, and he manned the base all night, and they searched every house, including mine. The police went through this house just in case I was being held hostage. I remember screaming at them, don't wake the little one, because she was only 18 months, and I'd put her to bed. And people come and went, I think somebody had died, they just come in, cakes and everything else. Oh dear. I sat up all night. The phone rang and rang and rang. I don't know how people knew. It got around very quickly. My sister-in-law rang from Melbourne about 10 o'clock at night, and I said, how did you know? Because we were told not to tell anybody. And she said, it was on the radio. She heard on the radio. I answered the phone repeatedly. I thought if the girls rang me, I would know their voice and know where they were. I really thought Melbourne would be where they'd gone.
12 years before the Farraday kidnapping, the Thorne case had been given wide publicity. The Thornes won a lottery, then their son was kidnapped and a ransom demanded. After 6 weeks of intense search and speculation, the murdered body of the 9-year-old boy, Graham Thorne, was found. Mary Gibbs.
I did know of the Thorne case. At this time when Graham Thorne was kidnapped, I think I was about 8 or 9. And I can remember going to bed, because I was living in New South Wales at that stage, and I can remember going to bed as a child, and this was on, and it really scared me at the time. And I had very, very, sharp memories of that case. So I was well aware of the outcome of that. And I was also well aware, what worried me, I think, more was the fact that there were 6 little girls, and I was only a young girl also, and that threat of sexual violence was there. I felt that it was there. Luckily, nothing happened, but to me, we were very vulnerable also. It was freezing cold. They shoved us all into Boland, shoved us all back into the van. We just sort of huddled up there and got as close together as we could to try and keep warm. There were, I don't know how long, time was irrelevant really, so I presume it would have been 10 or 11, and children wanted to go to the toilet to go. Well, when I went to the toilet the first time, I couldn't, there was just no way. So anyway, they let us out to go to the loo again, just round the side of the van, and I think he had a torch. And I said to him then, it was so bitterly cold, you've got no idea, we had no warm clothing at all, we'd dressed for a sunny day. Could we get into the front of the van with him? And he said, yes, we could. So we huddled in there, at least it was warmer, and at this stage he had little Denise, the little preppy, on his knee. He nursed her, which I really wasn't all that keen about, but anyway, because there was just I had the others all around me, I couldn't have all of them on top of me. And the children then dozed at this stage, and quite a few of them I think might have even gone into quite a good sleep. he was talking again at this stage. He wouldn't hurt children. He loves children. I said, well, if you love children, how can you do this to children? And this type of conversation took place. At one stage there, I sort of, I had my head down trying to sleep. I didn't, and his hand sort of came over and touched me. Well, that was enough for me, and it sort of got us all quite tense again. And then car lights came. I said, this had better be me mate, or you're gone sort of business. Luckily it was Eastwood came back. At this stage we had nothing to eat, by the way, either. Nothing to eat or drink. And I said, have you got, did you bring anything for us to eat? And he threw a thing of greasy old cold chips that he'd bought on his way from Melbourne. They must have been an hour or more old. Anyway, we ate them. We were starving. We ate them, and Bolan took a handful as well. And you're getting back in the back of the van. I said, it's just too cold. I said, come on. I said, haven't you got anything that we could have? I mean, it's so cold. Anyway, they said, well, you're getting back in the back of the van. So they shoved us in there, and they just threw in an old quilt and a pillow that was in the car. And the kids, they said, because I was the teacher, they let me have the pillow, which is rather nice, I thought, a little aside there. Anyway, we're in the van, and I think they drove away then. So we huddled up under this quilt. And I just said to the kids, I said, if I knew these children all had religion. I knew that they were all Christians. I said, look, just say a little prayer. I said, I know you all know how to pray. I said, say some prayers. I said, because I think if anything's going to help us, I said, prayer will help us get out of this. So they all said little prayers, and sort of they went off to sleep and dozed off to sleep. I think I even might have dozed off myself a little bit. It was so cold. I've never been so cold in my life, and it was pitch black. If you can imagine being in a hole that is just black with no light. Then little bits of light coming through the thing. I mustn't have had a watch on. Or my watch must have stopped, I think. I didn't have a watch. But I'd say it would have been around 6 o'clock-ish. Anyway, we're still sitting in this van. The car hadn't come out. We could peep through the holes. We couldn't see the car. However, we could hear shooting. And knowing these people had a gun, I thought, well, they'd be shooting somewhere. Once again, the call of nature was pretty strong, and these kids, they wanted to go to the loo, and I thought, there's just nowhere you can't. We went all round the van. You couldn't get out of it. It was totally sealed. Anyway, I looked at at the door where they'd pock riveted on steel panelling, and decided that we'd have a go at kicking it out or something anyway. So I kicked and kicked and we kicked, and the bigger girls had a bit of a kick and we kicked a bit more, and we would have kicked for a fair while, I think, and eventually one of the rivets came off. So that gave you a lot more strength, and I kicked an awful lot harder then. And when I got it was making noise, and the whole time I had the kids looking out those holes to see if the car was coming back. We had the gunshots going continually in the background, so it was total fear it was at that stage. I got out of that van expecting to be hit by a bullet any minute. Anyway, luckily I got out safely. I opened the door of the van and the kids got out. We were walking one way, and I said, went over a ridge there, and there was nothing there, just really thick bush. So I said, well, we won't go that way. We won't walk along the track in case these people come back. So we walked further into the bush, but so we could still be parallel with the road. We kept going that way until we came to a sealed road off the bush track. We walked, I don't know how long we walked for, a fair while. And I'd damaged my ankle kicking this van at this stage too, so I sort of got out of I could hardly walk anyway, but I think fear overtakes everything and you don't worry about that. And luckily I had on full boots, so they supported my ankle quite a bit. And we walked. Then when we came to the sealed road, we got back up into the bush again and walked parallel with it. So we could see their car, we could just pop down. There were rocks and everything, quite thick bush there. And there was a car up ahead, and it wasn't the car that these people were in. So we sort of this stage the kids were ready to charge. They were just ready to run to this car. So to grab them quietly and get them behind me was quite an effort, but anyway, that happened. And we just waited for a while and saw some girls with these at the car. They were different people. And then a couple of fellows arrived, and they were different looking people than the ones that had been with us. So the kids ran then. There was no way I could hold them. They ran to these people. these kids had been out spotlighting all night, these 4 people, and didn't really know anything about this kidnapping, hadn't listened to any news, didn't know what we were talking about, didn't have a clue. Anyway, what would you do? You were confronted with a young teacher with 6 little girls, frightened, bedraggled, starving, hungry. Anyway, they'd bundled us into their car, and they had a packet of cheesels as well. The kids devoured them. They thought that was great. And they drove us into the Lansfield police station. We pulled up there, and the policeman's wife at Lansfield was the only one home. The policeman wasn't there. He wasn't home. And she met us at the gate, and I told her, of course she knew, because it was all in that area, that all this was going on. And she thought that these 4 people with us were the ones who had kidnapped us. So she wouldn't have a bar of them. She's telling them to go away, stay out, you come in here and you stay out. I mean, as if these people were going to do that. And I'm trying to explain, I mean, they were a pretty rough-looking mob, and the hair was long and ratty and the whole bit, so she was, I suppose, quite right to believe that they weren't quite who they, thought they were.
Mary Gibbs and the 6 girls had been prisoners of the kidnappers for 16 hours, and they stayed prisoners to the demands of the legal system for more hours as they went through forensic tests and prolonged interrogation at Kyneton. For Thelma Conn, the waiting seemed endless.
It was a long wait, and I wanted to go across to, I thought it was Mansfield, it was Lansfield, but no, they advised us to not. The health girls come in first, and mine were the last to come home. The police brought them back, they'd all been interviewed, and sort of thing, their clothes gone over. Young Linda was sick, she was vomiting, it was one of the hold-ups sort of thing. I think Christine was too. I think the house girls seemed to be alright, because those 3 were travelling together, the other 3 together, because they had nothing to eat overnight, or chips only sort of thing. And then when they did give them food, it was ice cream. I just cuddle them. I did not go out on the street to meet them. I kept out of the press. The press followed you wherever you went. I ordered them off the property, told them to stay out on the road. The phone rang. Magazines from America were ringing in, sort of thing. And I had Channel 9, Channel 7. But I didn't have any of them in here, except the chap from the Sun, that Wayne Grant, was it? Wayne Grant, yeah.
A voracious media fell upon the Farraday kidnapping. Everything associated with the event and place became news. Even the boots that Mary Gibbs used to kick open the van had their moment of stardom. Teacher and pupils escaped on Saturday, the 7th of October, grand final day. And that afternoon, the front page of the Melbourne Herald was dominated by Kidnap Manhunt. Carlton's defeat of Richmond was reduced to 2 lines. Mary Gibbs' second ordeal with the press was about to start.
At the end of my interview to the police in Kyneton, the press were hounding. They wanted to speak to me, I was not in any state ready to speak to press. I hadn't been home. I hadn't seen my parents. I wanted to get home. I wanted to get out of there. A policeman, I don't know who he was, with quite high ranking, said, you have to speak to somebody. This fellow's all right. You can speak to him. I know him. And he brought this man in. Oh, yes, an exclusive interview. I'll give you whatever amount of money it was. Mind you, I never saw any of that money. But yes, we'll pay you this money. And it was a lot of money then. It was probably 3 months' pay, I think. He offered me. And at this stage, I thought, well, if I speak to one person, I don't have to speak to anyone else, right? So I said, okay. I spoke to this one man, this one interview, that came up to haunt me at trials because of things I said in it that I shouldn't have said. If I had had any time just to think about what I was saying, I would not have probably said things. I went home after that. I was, after that interview, trying to get through press and photographs and the whole bit. They just snap, snap, snap. I went home then. The phones, of course, at home were going non-stop with the press again. The following morning, I'm a Catholic, and I was going to my local mass. Oh, they tried. They were at the front door again at some ungodly hour. My father sent them. He said, no, he said, go away, she's had enough, leave her alone. However, they parked up the road and round the corner. They followed me to church. They took photos with their wonderful lenses of me coming out of church. I mean, there was a blanket of press. It wasn't just one or two that was a whole blanket. So when I was in and out of police stations, the press they were there all the time. The police were wonderful. I mean, the police protected me as if I was their daughter. They were just brilliant to me. I can't say enough in praise of the way that I was treated by them. But they'd tell me to bob down so they wouldn't know that I was in the car and all this. And they'd hide me in and out alleyways, and they really were wonderful protecting me from the press, except that one fellow who brought this, one reporter in. At one stage I got engaged at the end of 72, and I had my engagement ring off to be cleaned, and they'd noticed it gone. So straight away the engagement's off. Boom, and they're on it like that. So there was never any great love with the press and myself, I'm afraid.
Kidnappers and kidnapped were marked for the rest of their lives. They would always be identified as the ones involved in the Farraday kidnapping. The event itself went through 3 trials before Boland was sentenced to 16 years and Eastwood to 15. And Mary Gibbs was cross-examined for many hours on her role in the affair. But then both men escaped from jail, and Mary Gibbs was to experience more fear and long-term harassment.
Boland escaped in August of 76. Yes, I was a month off having my first child at that stage. And he escaped and he headed straight for Gisborne, where I was living. So I was virtually living in a house of siege again. In that situation, I was there with police with very heavy firearms. I shifted out of my own home, and I wasn't carrying the pregnancy all that well, so things were pretty tough then. I had press knocking left, right, and centre on doors, on windows, everything they could possibly do. It was like as if I was on, at siege. Well, at this stage, I am hugely pregnant, not very well, and did not need the press. Explained the situation to them. They did not let up that whole time he was out. It was hard enough him being out and me being like that and trying to get to see my doctor and make sure I wasn't going to be put into hospital without the press badgering the whole time. So that was okay. They did that little number. And then he was caught, so he decided to do a flit in December of that year, same year, 76. He got out again. Didn't head towards Gisborne straight away this time. However, I did have police protection. I had police at my place every night. They just surveyed outside the house all the time. I had the two-way radio. I had contact with them all the time. If I went anywhere, they had to know my whereabouts, etc., etc., etc. Press once again started all the hoo-ha, and then when he took the little school at Warreen, off she went again. So the press started up again, and they started it all again. They do it regularly. I had no sort of teenage, semi-adult years at all. I went from being a teenager to an adult overnight. There was just that 12 months there totally took away any of my growing period whatsoever, and I had to immediately become an adult. I didn't notice a change for myself. My sister, she often comments on the big change. She's 8 years older than I am, and I went and lived with her for quite a bit of this while these trials were on. And she was really horrified, I think, at the way that I had to grow up and the way I had to try and handle situations that I'd never come in contact with before.
One of the ironies of this program, which points to the impact of publicity on particular lives, is that it adds to the publicity and to the impact. Mary Gibbs, now married, moved to another district several years ago. She believed she'd left Farraday behind her.
I believed that I was anonymous and I believed that nobody knew my past, and I discovered that people were being polite. Whereas in other towns that I'd been in, they just kept, they'd ask the questions and off they go. And occasionally you'll get people that will really hone in and just badger you the whole time and really want, this, that and everything else. So you just shut up and just say, look, I don't talk about it anymore, it's finished, and do it that way. Although I find now that my children are becoming of an age where it's becoming important to them again. So I know I've let my eldest is nearly 12, my next one's 10, and I've let them read a few articles and whatever, but they don't think it's mum they're reading about. They can't equate that reading to their mother. This sort of doesn't make sense.
The first class after lunch on the 6th of October 1972 was the last time local children were taught in the Farraday school. When the school closed, the main force giving the community its identity had gone. Farraday is now little more than a postal address. Farraday, RSD, Castlemaine, Victoria. But it survives in memories. Farraday, the place where the kidnapping took place. The last pupils of Farraday School are often reminded of the association of place and event. Helen Conn.
The kidnapping is constantly revived for me, almost constantly. Whenever I am asked where I come from, I usually say Castlemaine. It's the closest town. But when I fill in official forms and have to put my home address, I write Farraday, and then it comes up, oh, Farraday, oh, that's where the Farraday kidnapping, you would have been there about the time, and so on. It goes on. When I began teaching, I saw how Mary was such a young teacher. I tried to put myself in her position. I realised what a wonderful job she did. And I know me as first year teacher, I don't know how I would have reacted in the same circumstances. When I went to college, my very first lecture was a general address to all the first year teachers, and it was the same college that Mary had been to. And it was one of the lecturers who she'd also had too. Didn't change over much. And his opening address was, we prepare you teachers for everything here, absolutely everything. We'll teach you even how to deal with kidnappings. Not that anything like that will ever happen to any of you. I just sat there and smirked.
In this program, Farraday, in the Bush School series, you heard the voices of Mary Gibbs, Thelma Conn and Helen Conn. The program was edited by Bronwyn Hughes and prepared and presented by Dr. Hank Nelson, Senior Fellow in the Department of Pacific and Southeast Asian History at the Australian National University.